The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to everybody who's joined our session with us here at Sandhill. My name's Jograj. I'm one of the senior consultants here, and I'm going to be taking you through this quick 30-minute demonstration of the Erwin Data Intelligence Suite. We're going to be looking at it to see how we can use their product set to help us to, as the title says, accelerate project delivery by taking a look at our metadata assets. Now, just a couple of points. One is the session is being recorded, so if you do miss anything, as long as obviously you've signed up, you'll be able to receive the recording after the session has completed. That's the first point. And secondly, because of the time period that we've got, only 30 minutes, unfortunately we can't take questions, and we don't have a sort of Q&A session at the end. So if you do have questions, if you put them in the chat, everybody will be able to see them, but they will also be a record for us. And what we'll do is at the end of the session is we'll go through the questions and we'll answer the questions for everybody and distribute the answers to everybody that's attended in that. So with that in mind, let's move on with the session that we have here then. So I'm just going to give you a very, very quick overview of what we're going to be covering here today. So there's a brief introduction as to who we are, Sandhill, so that you know who the presenters are and who the organization here is. We're also going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges that people have when it comes to understanding what the data is. So we will have a very quick slide on that. Then what we're going to do is really introduce what is a sort of a governance framework to help you to make sense of both data governance aspects and also the underlying metadata and the data architectures that you have to help us to answer the sorts of questions that we're looking to answer to accelerate our project deliveries in there. But the bulk of the time is really going to be to do with the demonstrations. And again, as I say, if you do have any questions, just put them in the chat and we'll follow those up with yourselves. So if you don't know already who we are, we as a company is Sandhill, and we are partners with Erwin, or now as they're called Quest. But we as a company, we offer all sorts of things in here. We offer product sales, consultancy, technical support, training, mentoring, etc. And we have offices both here in the UK from where I'm based, and we cover EMEA, but we've also got offices in North America. And between us, we operate on a global basis. So with that in mind, what you're going to get out of this quick session here is how you can get some accelerated and quick value from having a set of integrated metadata assets. And by those sort of metadata assets, what we're talking about is looking at your metadata catalog, so having a catalog of your assets, having a catalog of your metadata mappings, and that's talking about what data movements that you've got and what transformations of the data that you've got in there. But obviously all of that is highly technical in its nature, but the business is also interested in understanding what are the business terms that we have, what's the vocabulary or the set of objects and nouns and verbs and things that we are doing within the business that we're interested in. And that normally gets recorded as a set of business terms in there. And if we have an integrated framework or an integrated repository where we're holding this information, it gives us the ability to be able to get a holistic view of your metadata, what data is being used, who's using it, where is it being used, etc. And that gives us the opportunity, therefore, to be able to do on demand, be able to perform business and data lineage, be able to work out what the data movements are in there. If we're looking to create a new project and we want to scope that project, define what that project is, we can go in and very quickly do a data impact analysis. We can define the project scope on there, Again, with these assets, if they're being governed and managed in a central area, we can go in and collaborate and share those assets on there. And of course, we can also apply governance to the assets as well. So what's the point of doing all of this? Well, the end result that we want is to be able to improve the trust and the confidence in your data so that when people are using it, either to look at the data that you've got or engaging in new projects or new requirements, new reports, new functionality, they want to be able to, or the users want to have trust and confidence in your data that the data that they're looking at is exactly what they're expecting to find there. And for those people that are engaged in providing the data and the data assets that we're interested in, we want to eliminate the pain of finding the right data. And I'm sure that you've all experienced this whenever you're looking at a new project, you come along and say, right, where's the source from this data? Now I've got to go and reverse engineer this database, or I've got to go and find Joe Blogs or somebody to help me find out what this is. And the end result really is that delays you and slows you down. So really, if you've got this catalog of assets and we've got this integrated view of these metadata assets, it helps us to increase the productivity and the operational efficiency, and therefore also increase the agility that we have and we can exercise and accelerate the time to value. So how do we get to a point where we've got this holistic view? Well, to get at this holistic view, what we need to be able to do is to go in and harvest the metadata that we've got. Yeah? And there are things like automated connectors, and I'm going to show you some examples of those where we can go in and pull that information in. We need to be able to understand and analyze the relationships that we have between the various metadata assets. We need to be able to link it in to the classification of the business terms that we've got. We need to be able to go and apply some governance. And there's no point in keeping all this information. We need to be able to communicate this information with others and share that. So we need to be able to communicate it. So those are all the things that we need to do. But how do we make sense of this? Well, this is where an integrated type of governance framework comes in. So obviously the business itself has got strategic business drivers, and then we've got the data governance drivers which support that. We need to have data management capabilities which support the business capabilities which drive or fulfill the strategic business drivers. And so in this framework, what we're looking to do is, from a governance perspective, is to look at those processes that help us to govern the assets and the life cycle of those assets. We need to be able to organize the people in terms of their access and the roles and what they're allowed to do with the data. And obviously we need to be able to monitor our progress and see how well we're managing the assets. So this top bit here looks at all the governance side, whereas everything down here at the bottom is to do with looking at your metadata and the data assets, yeah? And that's looking at the metadata that we've got, the data models that we've got, our data life cycles, where do we collect the data from, where's it stored, how do we archive it, etc. And of course, we're also interested in the data movement in there as well. And the data movement is defining the source and the target mappings, as well as the transformations that are taking place in there. So in my example, what we're going to do is spend the rest of the time doing a number of different use cases, yeah? And in these use cases, we're going to be looking at how we can use the integrated set of assets that we've got to be able to answer specific types of use cases, yeah? And I'm going to show you how, as part of the demonstration, how we can satisfy these different types of use cases. Just remember, these are example ones here for the demonstration. Obviously, there are many, many others that we've got. So if I start off by this quick one, which says, somebody's using a business intelligence report, it's got some errors in there that they or they suspect there are some errors in there, and they want to raise an issue and go along and ask the IT support to go and fix that particular issue in there. So how do we go about doing this? Well, what we do is we can go in, and remember when I was talking about the holistic set of assets that we've got, and we need to be able to publish those. Well, we can publish the assets out into what we call a business user portal. And in this business user portal, I can come in and take a look at the different assets that we've got, the business assets that we've got. I can go and take a look at the metadata that we've got in terms of the tables and the columns and so on. But as a business user, I'm going to come in here and say, well, actually, you know what it is? I'm interested in the credit report that we're looking at. There's some certain fields in there that weren't particularly correct. So I want to go and find out about that. So I might not know the information or the data tables that are storing that information. I don't know the metadata assets. But what I do know is, from a business perspective, using the terminology of the business, there are things in here which I'm interested in, and there's a thing in here which is called credits, yeah? And that's what I'm interested in, yeah? So this is an academic exercise in here where we've got, or an academic model that I've got in here. So I've got credits, which is a business term in here. And in this business term, it tells us what this particular business term itself means. For that business term, I can go in and say, right, let's go and take a look at the associations for that. Let's expand this, and we can come in here and we can see that this business term is related to some technical assets that we've got. It's part of a set of metadata assets where we've got a table, and in this particular table, there's a particular column called credits, yeah? And if I click onto that, we can see some typical information about this, yeah? And it tells us about the column that we've got in there. Is it handling any specific, well, actually, let's just double click on that and we'll find that information in there. So we can look at the details of that. So here it is. Here's that particular column for credit. So remember, we've gone from the business term to looking at the column, and we can see some technical information in here. Now, not only are we able to look at the technical information, but we can also take a look at its data movement. So for the purposes of my business report, the business intelligence report that I've got, I can go in and see the data movement. So here's my source for that data. Yeah. So I can see in here what are the summary information for this. It's a numeric, and what type of information it is in there. It moves to this column in here. But also, if I click onto this particular transformation point in here, it tells me that there's a transformation which is going on in there as well. So I can go in there and take a look at that, and it's telling me that we're taking some information from a numeric source of 3 units long in here, and we're moving that information into a target column of 41 of its length, and there's a business rule that's being used in here. So immediately I can come into here and see where my data is being sourced from and any transformations, and that gives us the ideal opportunity to be able to investigate where along this particular data movement, if anything, you know, any errors have been introduced, yeah? So it could be possibly the fact that we're converting into some sort of abnormal data fields in here from the source. So it gives us the opportunity to be able to go and investigate any transformations. It gives us the ability to be able to follow the lineage in here and see the data movement and work out from the source to the target itself, where we've got this target here, yeah, where we've got the cleansed information as to if there's any errors in what's happening to the data. So we can eliminate if it's the process by which we're moving and handling the data, or if it's the actual data itself as well. So that's, you know, one particular use in there. Another example could be, for example, in here I was talking about data cleansing. Yeah. So one of the ideas here is that lots of people have addresses as part of you know, their registration information, but from experience I know that people find putting in the information for the address field varies, and there's a lack of consistency in there. And so how can we investigate this? If we want to clean up our data, how can we use the assets that we've got to help us to do that? So again, I can go back to my published set of assets in here, and I can go and take a look at one of the business terms in here. So again, if I look at my business term in here, but this time, instead of looking for credit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for something which says address. So in here, address is mentioned as part of an address business term, and also as part of a postcode business term. And if I happen to look at the address business term in here, again, I can see some of the information. Is it the right sort of thing that I'm interested in? Yeah. And if it is, I can go and take a look at its mind map. And from that mind map, again, I can come in and find out what are the associations that that has with any of my metadata assets. So here it is. Here's my address business term. I've got some tables, in the employees table, customers table, suppliers, and in there I've got some fields which are handling the address columns. Yeah. And again, I can go into here, find and select that particular column, select that particular table, and go and take a look at its lineage. Yeah. And if it was modeled in here, we'd be able to see that lineage and see the actual data movements. But what this is doing in here is it's giving me the opportunity to be able to go and scope a project to say, well, if I'm going to be looking at any address information, these are the various tables that I should be going in and looking at. Yeah. So again, we're accelerating the project delivery by using the metadata assets that we've got, the catalog of business terms that we've got, to help us to identify the scope of any projects that we've got in here. And the other last one that I wanted to show you in here is, let's see, have we got, or it might be a case that we need to be able to demonstrate that we are complying with any regulatory requirements. And one of those things that we can do in here, again, as part of the assets that we've got, again, if I go back to my home page, look at the dashboard in here. On our dashboard, I can see the various assets that we've got. And in these assets, I can see that we've got some sensitive data being handled in here. We've got the business terms. We've got lots of different assets. If I were to click onto the catalog of assets that we've got, which are designated as being sensitive, I can see a list of those assets in here. So some of these are like gender, the postal code, yeah, their titles, etc. So we've got the information, we've got the ability to be able to go in here and identify these particular objects and potential areas. Yeah. So again, if I go back and I decide that I want to look at one of those things in a bit more detail. So remember, again, if I'm interested in the postal codes, so if I look at my metadata, and remember, I looked at the postal code, so I could come into here. Rather than looking at it from the business terms perspective, I can come in here and say, right, I know I'm interested in things to do with postcodes. Yeah. And so, oops, have I done that wrong? Yeah, here we are. So we've got things in here which are called postal code, etc. And we can go in here and select any of these. And we can go in at the metadata level and select that particular asset and see how it's being defined, and also what type of sensitive data indicators it's got. So in this instance, we're saying this could be used as a way of personally identifying an instance of that person in there. Okay, so we are able to do that in here. Now, similarly, when I was looking at this, rather than just going in, as I was saying, at the metadata level, I could have done the same sort of thing by looking at the business terms as well. And so when we're looking at a business term which defines our postcode, and in this model, what I've got, again, I've got my model set up in here. It says that postcode has been identified as handling personally identifiable information. If I expand the relationships in here, I can see all the different instances where we've got that possible postal code here. And actually there's differences here, the way it's handled, it's postcode here, postal code here. And these are all the tables in which we've got that identifiable information. So again, very quickly, we can come into here, see how the assets are integrated with one another, how they are defined in here as the catalog of your metadata assets, as your tables, your columns in here, and be able to use the assets to help us to scope out and work with and identify the scope of any projects that we're looking to embark upon. So if I need to be able to demonstrate in this example the assets that we've got for regulatory compliance, I can come in here and very, very quickly show these particular assets, say this is where we're holding the data. And of course, if we've got other systems which are handling the processes and the screens and the users, we can relate that back to these and show how we're complying with our regulatory requirements. So the assets that I've shown you here are the published assets into our business user portal. And so I'm pretty sure that you're all asking yourselves, how did these assets actually get into here? How did we collect the information to populate the information that we've got in here? And the answer to that is that we need to go back and be able to use a number of smart connectors or data connectors to help us to go and harvest those assets. And let me just refresh the page in here. Okay, so what I've now got here is the information that you were seeing in the published sets of assets. And what we can do in here is we can take a look at the different assets that we've got in here. Remember, I was showing you we've got different tables in here. So for this particular table in here, I've got a table plus the various columns of information. So remember the credits column that I was showing you earlier. And here is its definition, its type and its length and all that sort of information. But how do we create and harvest this information? Well, we create this by connecting through some connectors. What these connectors do is they give us the ability to be able to go in and harvest information from a number of different sources. Now, in my example in here, I happen to use an Excel file, but it could have been very easily any alternative sources of our database information. So for example, it could have been a SQL Server, or it could have been MySQL or Oracle or Salesforce or Snowflake, etc. And so we're able to connect to these various databases, specify the parameters for connection to that, whatever database and so forth that we need, the usernames, etc., and be able to come into here and run and scan that particular source so we can harvest the assets and pull those into here. And when we do that, we can do this either on demand or we can do it on a scheduled basis. So it's done on a regular basis, every week, every month, or whenever. But what it's doing for us is it's creating a catalog of assets that we've got in here, of the metadata assets. And so in this example, as I say, I've got the various credits, I've got the various postal codes, the addresses, but it's not just across one system, it's across all the different systems. So here's an operational data store for my other data warehouse, and in here I've also got customers, I've got employees, and each one of these has got first names, they've got address fields in here, etc. So we can store all the metadata assets in here and be able to harvest these. And of course, you remember when I was connecting these columns and the tables to the business terms that we've got. Now, obviously in here, these are very meaningful terms that we've got, but sometimes the columns, the tables can be very abstract in their naming. And so that's where we need to be able to link in the business terms, link them into the tables and to the columns, so that we can identify those particular columns and the tables that are of interest to us. And that's where this library and the catalog of assets really comes in. So what we've done here is, this is the catalog of those assets. How did I look at and trace the data lineage that we had and the data mappings? Well, for that, what we do is we use what's called the mapping manager. And what the mapping manager does, it gives us the ability in a similar way, but rather than looking at the metadata assets, now you can tell this is a live demonstration in here, rather than looking at the static metadata assets, what we're able to do in here is to look at the data movements that we've got. So for example, in here, I can come in here and see a source and target mapping that we've got between these various tables. And so here's a high level view in here. If I zoom in just a little bit, we can see the individual tables and the individual columns, and we can see the mappings that are taking place in here. And again, when we were looking at the credits column and we were looking at the data movement and the data lineage, if I select that in here, notice it gets highlighted in orange and we can see the data movement that's going on in here. And in this example, if I bring that down a bit, we can see our data lineage, the individual mappings and the data lineage overall as it moves from the source, goes through the various staging tables and holding tables and calculation tables, etc., and ultimately ends up in this particular column over here. Yeah. So we've got this data lineage in here. And I can hear you again asking, well, how did we create this? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can create this. First of all, we can come in here and we can use the existing sets of metadata assets that we scanned in. So remember, when I was showing you those data connectors and we reversed in and we pulled in this information, we can drag and drop these tables into here and start manually creating the mappings in here, which is fine if you're looking to create a new set of mappings, but it's not so good if you're trying to reverse engineer and reverse in and determine existing mappings that you might already have. And what the tool sets enable us to do is to go in here and actually run what we call smart connectors. And what these smart connectors can do is they can look at your I guess your ETL type of packages. So in this example, I'm going to do an ETL reverse engineering. I can do it, say, for Informatica or Data Stage or for SSIS. And this is just for the demonstration purposes here. I can select SSIS and say, right, what's the source package file that I want to use for this? And so I can select one in here. I could select a number of these. So it's a .dtsx file. So that's a SSIS package file. And in that package file, it's specifying what the source columns are, the target columns, and the mapping, and any other information that we might be interested in, the business transformation rules, etc. So we can take that particular package file, upload it to the server, and execute that connector against that. And that will hopefully work out for us the data movements and the data transformations and create for us a set of mappings that we can use by both looking at the individual mappings and also looking at the end-to-end lineage that we've got in there. So that's reversed that in. So notice in here it says 0 in the brackets at the moment. Let's do a refresh in there. And if I do a refresh, we can come into there and we can see that it's reversed in a number of mappings. There's some control flows, but we're interested in these mappings here. And these are the data movements that are taking place in here. So here we are, we've got the tables, the individual mappings again in there. And again, we can trace the lineage and the data movements going through in there. And so that's the visualization of that mapping, but obviously a tabular version of that also exists, and that tells us the individual mappings that we've got, and of course also if we've got any data movements that are taking place in there. So this particular session itself, as I say, is a very, very quick session. It's only 30 minutes long to introduce you to how we can go in and harvest the metadata assets, how we can collect the business terms, how we can do the data lineage and the data mapping, and use all of that to answer the sorts of questions that we're interested in, to help us to identify what data we should be using and working with, to help us identify the columns and the tables and the data movements in there. And the value of having this integrated, holistic set of assets which we can use means that as an individual, as a user, you know where to go. Yeah, everybody uses the same sets of terms. Everybody uses the same tool set in there. Things are automated in there. If you're having to reverse data engineer your data movements, that can take a long time. Here we've accelerated that by using these smart connectors. We can look at the sets of integrated relationships to work out the dependencies, perform impact analyses, and look at the scope of the projects that we want. So that's what we get out as individual users. And for the management, yeah, you can come in and see in there the central point of reference for everything. Yeah, see what progress people are making in there. Encourage collaborative sharing in there. Have a common vocabulary, which everybody shares in there. Make sure that the process is subject to a governance process, so everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And the idea is really to improve the quality of the data, reduce the number of data assets that we've got in there, and this type of approach, as I say, provides us with a structure and a workflow and a framework to organize and create the content that we've got in there. So with that in mind, that brings me up to exactly 30 minutes. And as a final thought, just remember, all of this is to help us to really have or obtain better business value of the assets by improving the data quality. We can achieve that. And of course, we need data governance to deliver that data quality to help us achieve the better business value in there. If you want to know further about what I've been presenting here, or you want an in-depth demonstration, or indeed you want to know anything else about what I've shown you or want to make contact, here are some details for you to reach out to us. Thank you very much for taking the time out to visit us today. Thank you and goodbye.